Thank you very much, Dr. Healy. Thank you, Fernando, and Alberto, and Hernan, and all the crowd that has put this together. I've been doing events for over 15 years, and I know how tough it is. So congratulations. Thank you all for being here. I'll try to share some of these experiences, as Dr. Healy said. When you are interviewing these people, you have to extract a lot of their knowledge. Great leaders have it in their veins, in their DNA. They don't necessarily understand what they're doing. So my role as an interviewer throughout these years has been to extract that treasures, and I want to share them with you tonight. Leadership is a complex issue. It has to do with human beings. It's like love or like midlife crisis. You might all have an idea, but you still have a lot to learn. This is my agenda for today. I have 3 key messages that I'll unfold as I speak. Some bad news, the implications of all of the above, and finally, a good example to finish and jump into the Q&A sessions with you. The first message I want to give you is about culture. And that is, culture can multiply results. Culture can multiply results. Who is convinced that culture can multiply results? 1, 2, 3. Okay, I hope more of you would be convinced by the end. Who in a business, in a startup or in any company, would try to have a strategic plan? Okay, now, who would try to have a culture plan? A little bit less. Okay. Let me prove you that culture can multiply results, whatever those results, whatever the metrics you aim at, being it number of customers, being sales, being profits, whatever. The first, I would say, proof of that is the Great Place to Work research. This, it's somehow correlated to culture, but it has embedded some of the key implications of culture. And when you look at those companies, they perform twice better than their comparables. They provide twice better return on investment. And just to take an indication of the engagement and commitment that people have, they experience 65% less turnover than their comparables. So, and by a great place to work, I don't mean just a comfortable place and somewhere where everyone is nice and not working enough. The second proof is more on examples, and the example is Herb Kelleher and his Southwest Airlines. You've all experienced Southwest at some point, I'm sure. It carries 100 million passengers per year, but it has something that, for me, it's amazing. If you told me you were going to give me for free a company that's an airline industry, an airline, so in the airline industry, very, very tough, and with a low-cost strategy, therefore tough to differentiate, one might think, I would say no, just keep it. But over the 30-year period between 1972 and 2002, Herb Kelleher turned Southwest Airlines not only into the most profitable airline, but the best investment among any of the SP 500 companies. So, you have to stop and with admiration at this point. Someone that did not only such a great investment of Southwest, but also in terms of airline, but also across all other industries among the biggest 500 companies in America. Let's see what he says about the reason behind this success. What is the key to his success in Southwest?
I've always thought that our esprit de corps, the attitude of our employees, was one of our biggest competitive advantages. You know, people like to be treated nice, like to be treated well, and our people do that from the goodness of their hearts. And that is an advantage over other carriers.
So just this esprit de corps, our attitude, was the biggest competitive advantage. I never at business school studied esprit de corps 101 or attitude 101. We thought everything had to do with the hard variables. And here's the man that says, no, our people is the biggest competitive advantage. And we were discussing in his office, that's like a kid's room full of memorabilia and toys and basketballs. A little bit the difference between strategy and culture. And he said, yeah, we did have the same strategy, 10-word strategy, you know, short haul, point-to-point, low-cost carrier. But the important is culture. He said, you know, what's the difference between strategy and culture? He said, well, no, tell me. He said, Napoleon. When Napoleon was around a table with his general discussing how to invade Russia, that is strategy. But having 1 million men marching to Moscow, that is culture. 1 million men marching to Moscow, that is culture. Men that didn't know what the word strategy meant, and that, by the way, most of them never came back. So imagine what that implies. What do you have to give those men as a reason to move and to do that impossible things is culture. Let me now share a different example. Tony Hsieh. He's a very interesting guy, low-key, easy conversation, a little bit shy. And he was telling me his story. He said, you know, I founded a tech company, and I wanted it to be very successful, as every entrepreneur. And I said, I need to hire the best people, the most intelligent people. And so I did. And one day, I realized that my company was full of very intelligent people I didn't like to work with. That's very interesting. And so he sold the company for over $250 million. That's great, Microsoft. And then started as an advisor and became the CEO of Zappos.com. And there, he said, I wasn't going to make the same mistake. So started to engage and work and define which were the people he liked to work with. And that's the secret of Zappos.com, that has a very, very strong culture. And this guy says, culture is more important than strategy. Culture is more important than strategy. I've been a strategy consultant for many years at Booz Allen, and over 200 projects, and never once added culture to my framework of analysis. But here's this guy that a few years later sold it, the company, Zappos.com, to Amazon.com, and has been very successful believing in doing that. So, and he uses the science of happiness to manage the company. And the science of happiness is a very interesting tool to better understand and leverage culture. And finally, a guy that I admire enormously that built a very, very successful group, took it from $13 billion to $400 billion market cap, General Electric, in an incredible value creation story. And we had him in many of the events we organized throughout the years, so I discussed many things with him. And once I asked him, what is your biggest professional mistake? And without hesitation, he said, buying an investment bank. Okay, why? Because of the culture. I couldn't understand the culture. He bought Kidder Peabody. He later had to sell it off. They had a culture of bonuses. I couldn't manage them. He couldn't get to the heart of the people. And in his own words, later in a formal interview, this is how he puts it.
But I made acquisitions that didn't work. And I learned from sometimes I bought a company with a bad culture. Why'd that fail? Because I bought something without thinking of the culture. I was doing the numbers, not thinking of the culture.
Simple, a few seconds. I was thinking of the numbers, not the culture. I was doing the numbers. So here's the guy that's the most admired CEO of the 20th century, that managed businesses from light bulbs to medical equipment to jet engines, and says, I couldn't manage a company because of the culture. And I looked across all business schools, and I can't see Culture 101. The best leader and manager I've met, and this is his flaw, his problems, culture, okay? And finally, we can say, I think, without hesitation, that culture can multiply results. That's the first message. And if you go now, this is a huge takeaway, and I won't charge you the tuition that you paid Babson for that. The second issue we have is we say, okay, culture can multiply results, but what is culture? And culture is very hard to define. And Herbert Kelleher told me, you know, I would rather use the Supreme Court's definition of pornography for culture. What is that? You know it when you see it, okay? I like to think of this as gravity. You know, we don't see it, we don't understand it, but if you drop something, it falls. And culture is as strong as gravity. So what is culture? A typical definition would include this: why we work and how we work, you know, how we do things around here. And I think it's a very interesting definition, and I would agree with the definition, but I think it's totally misleading. Because you might think that if you have certain goals and certain objectives, that's why we work, and you define certain procedures and job descriptions and systems, then you have the right culture. And that is wrong. That is wrong. So let me tell you, for me, what is culture. Culture are all those things that create a sense of purpose, that create passion, hope, that create a sense of community, self-confidence in each one of the team members, that create trust and self-esteem, that create pride and engagement and other happiness and other positive states of mind. When you fire up people with all these emotions, with all these states of mind, then you have culture. Then you have 1 million men marching to Moscow. So we have to flip definition the other way around. Whatever you do that achieves this, you are in the right track. And you know, for, I think, 150 years, we've stripped work from emotions. And great leaders bring them back and use them. So, my second great message, another 80% of the presentation, would be culture is about emotions, about its states of mind that you wake up in yourself and in the team. Before going to message number 3, I need to step backwards and talk about a framework. In business as usual, as I call it, you have strategy and you have marketing and you have operations and finance and all those job functions that define the departments of your company and allow you to think and design and execute a given business. Each one of those functions, I would say, has a framework and, or multiple frameworks, from the 4 Ps of Kotler to the 5 forces of Michael Porter, that you can use in terms of framing the issues around those topics. But leadership is like a big blanket on top of that. Because the human being, with its passion, its creativity, is not in the business as usual frameworks. In the strategy, in the operations, in the finance, in the marketing frameworks, the human being is absent. And so we say, okay, we need to lead people, and we call it leadership, but we don't have a framework. I'll try to give you a framework, and frameworks are very important. I remember once talking with Alan Greenspan backstage, I said, how do you get yourself informed? How do you read the newspaper? Because sometimes the most important news is at the bottom of page 8. And he sort of reflecting and said, you're right. I have a framework of how the world works. And when I read the newspaper, I hear the news, I try to see if the data validates or challenges my framework. And therefore, sometimes the most important piece of news is small at the bottom of page 8. If you don't have a framework for leadership, it will take you longer to learn, because everything is interesting. But you end up with a list of 175 things to do that you just throw over the window and you're yourself. I'll try to give you a framework then that has 5 key roles of leadership. And I'll use first John Chambers, the CEO of Cisco, took the company from 1.5 billion to over $50 billion of turnover in the last years. Internal growth, acquisitions, short, very interesting guy. And he started, stressing the importance of culture. And on stage at the World Business Forum, this is how he framed it.
To me, I think I'm supposed to do 4 things reasonably well. The first is to determine the vision and strategy of the company based upon input from my customers and my leadership team. The second is to develop and to recruit the leaders to implement that vision and differentiated strategy. The third, and I did not understand this as a new business leader, to develop a culture. And it's such an important part of your success or not as an organization. And the fourth is to communicate all the above. As simple as it sounds, that would be the scorecard that I would look back at the end of the year and ask my board of directors to use.
And it's interesting because people like Steve Ballmer also say culture. And I didn't know that before being CEO. And now I would say is my key role to leverage the culture. Okay? Vision, the team, and people, the culture, and communication. Here we have 4 key roles. The next guy I'd like to share how he defines leadership is Tony Blair.
But in the end, I think if you're in a position of leadership, what you owe people that you are leading, what you owe them in the ultimate analysis is the truth as you see it and the right decision as you perceive it. And it's not easy to do, especially when the decision may be an unpopular one, but I think your kind of duty as a leader is to do what you think is right, and then it's for the public to decide.
So it's the truth as you see it and the right decision as you perceive it. Those were, in his mind, the key roles of a leader. So if we add with what John Chambers says, we have 5 key roles that I would think involve 95% of all different leadership activities. The first is to establish the vision. The second, to set up the team, to care for the people. The third, it's about communications. Fourth, decision-making, not only taking the tough decisions, but the decision-making process. And finally, and in a way involving all of the above, is culture. So with those 5 key roles, we end up with strategy as sort of the mother of the hard variables, and culture that I would define as the umbrella for the leadership responsibilities. Strategy and culture. So you might ask yourself, strategy or culture, what's more important? And Peter Drucker allegedly said, culture eats strategy over breakfast. I would say, strategy or culture? It's the culture, stupid. It's there that you have the potential. Because we've all worked too much and too hard on strategy, and we've avoided tapping on the potential of culture. And all these CEOs and companies do believe that culture is more important or as important as strategy. So let me rephrase message number 1. It's the culture, stupid. And then just make sure you get message number 3, that is a new leadership framework with 5 key roles. Let me redefine a little bit those words and roles so that you can put soul into that previous chart. Vision, establishing the vision. If I were to ask one question to each one of you in your organization to see how to tap on this role of establishing the vision, this is the question I would ask. What is the dream? What is the dream? Not what's the goal, what's the plan, what is the dream? Are you jumping out of bed every morning to accomplish something that is amazing for you? What is the dream for the organization, for you, for your team? And I like to tell the story of a medieval traveler, maybe 13th century in France. He was walking and all of a sudden found a young man carving stone, and he asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm earning my salary. I'm working from, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and to feed my family." "Okay, thank you." And the traveler continues. And a little bit later, he finds another guy, another young man, in the same position, carving stone, and he asked, "What are you doing?" And the young man says, "I am carving a statue, a beautiful statue of a woman with a beauty that's amazing." And this young traveler continues his way and finds a third young man carving stone in the same way. And he asks the young man, "What are you doing?" And the young man says, "I'm building a cathedral. I'm building a cathedral." The three were making exactly the same movements, exactly the same job. And one has just the economic aspect of it. The second one has a little bit of the professional and value to it. But it's only the third one that captures the dream and the belonging to a group of people that were building cathedrals. What is the dream? And let me add some words of Rudy Giuliani about that, about the vision, about leadership, that we'll discuss later.
First and most important principle of leadership is to be a leader, you have to have strong beliefs. You have to know what you believe. You have to know what you stand for. There are a lot of ways to describe this. You have to have a plan. You have to have a set of goals. Leadership is about ideas.
Leadership is about ideas. And I like the way he gets to that because, again, it's like nested Russian dolls. First, you have to know what you believe. You have to start by saying, what do I stand for? What do I believe? And then you finish saying leadership is about ideas. But as you might guess, I think it goes beyond, because leadership is about the emotions those ideas wake up in you and your team. When Martin Luther King says, "I have a dream," before knowing even what the dream is, you have goosebumps. You need to wake up emotions in people. And I like the etymology of emotions because it's about motion, about movement. If you want someone to move, you don't only need to explain it here, but you need to get to the heart of the people and wake up those emotions that will make you march to Moscow. The second key role of leadership, we say it's people, to develop the team. But if I were to choose one question that represents the deep meaning of just building the team, this would be it. Do you deeply care for people? Do you deeply care for people? Do you genuinely care for people? If you think people are human resources, they won't follow you. You might have authority, they might, comply, but you won't be a leader. You have to care for them. In Jack Welch's own words, it's the generosity gene. He says you need to wake up your generosity gene to take care for people. And then you can say, with this in mind, you will naturally, try to help your people discover their talent, to put them in jobs where they can use that talent, give them recognition. All those things are just part of deeply care. And if you remember this, you'll do all the rest. You have been quoted as saying that most of what you learned about leadership, you learned in the first 2 months at Fort Benning. Is that so? What did you learn?
It's quite true. As a young 21-year-old brand new lieutenant, I was sent to our infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia, to be taught to be an infantry leader. And what they drilled into us is that leadership is all about followership. And the role of a leader is to serve the followers. The followers get the job done. The followers do the work. The followers ultimately are responsible for the success of the organization. And if the leader is successful in taking care of the followers, empowering the followers will take care of the leaders. They want to know what the mission is. What do you want them to achieve? What is the purpose of our operation? And you as a leader have a responsibility to give to your followers that sense of purpose, that passion, that intensity. Leaders who are not intense in their beliefs will not cause followers to be intense in their following. And so leaders have to be passionate, they have to be intense, and that's what they taught us.
And so he points out to these two first tasks of giving a mission and a purpose, and then taking care of the people. Okay. Clinton, in a conversation on stage, also says a similar thing.
The only other thing I think leaders need to do is to understand not only policies, but people. And I always, people ask me sometimes, how did I get to be a governor a president coming from a small state that was poor and all that? I said, I got to be president because I came from a small state that was poor. My family didn't have a television until I was 10. My parents' generation and my grandparents' generation never got any education, and they were brilliant. And I grew up in an environment where the guy that was pumping your gasoline might be just as smart as a town doctor. So we were taught from early childhood to have an obsessive interest in people, to believe everybody had merit, everybody had a story, and to imagine the impact of everything we said and did on someone else. That's what a leader needs to do. And the best leaders can do it and not be paralyzed by it, but be empowered by it.
And I like, he talks about people. If you are aware of the impact of people, you might be paralyzed. He said, no, be empowered. But be sure you recognize and have an obsessive interest in people. In communication, I would ask, are you connected with your people? Are you deeply connected? And communication has many levels, and we think communication, we think of the newsletter, but no, that's the sharing of ideas is very important, but then you have to listen, flow of ideas. Then you have to inspire, and you have to be empathic, the flow of emotions. And then you have to walk your talk. Through actions, you communicate. Walk your talk. Ideas, emotions, and actions. And that builds connection. That builds credibility. That allows you to build one of the most important attributes in organizations, that is trust. You talk with candor, you walk your talk, you mean what you say what you mean, and that builds connection and trust. Next is decision-making. And the one question I would ask is, are you empowering your team? Because in decision-making, we generally have focused on management, the study of the right decisions, and on the information availability, gathering, process, and analysis. And decision-making is an amazingly powerful tool to build your team. Because when you delegate, when you support your team, when you allow them to learn from their mistakes or their successes, you allow them to gain self-esteem, self-confidence, to grow. So don't look always to take the best decision, but your decision, your company's decision. Allow people to grow through an appropriate decision-making process. And finally, culture. The one question I would ask is, are you proud, engaged, and happy? If you ask that question and you are, then, as we saw, you have built a culture. And I like to show now what a sports person has to say. Argentine, just by chance. He was member of the World Championship winning team in '86 in Mexico, and then trainer of the Real Madrid. And this is what he has to say.
Cuando la gente siente lo que hace, cuando la gente se siente comprometida, pues desde esa actitud es capaz de contagiar a todo el grupo. Un equipo es un estado de ánimo. Eso es un equipo. Y una persona también es fundamentalmente un estado de ánimo. En el mundo del fútbol se ve con frecuencia jugadores que tienen la confianza de su entrenador, el respeto del periodismo, el cariño de los aficionados y llegan a la excelencia. Pasan a otro equipo, dejan de tener esos soportes externos y pueden no pasar de la mediocridad. Y hablamos de un individuo. Cuando hablamos de muchos individuos, pues el efecto del estado de ánimo puede parecer incluso milagroso. Es increíble lo que es capaz de provocar un estado de ánimo, positivo o negativo, dentro de un equipo.
How important it is for individual performance and for group performance. And we think for a marketing analyst it's not the same. I've seen young professionals scared to death, anguished about, will they keep the job, will they be fired, do stupid things professionally speaking. And the same guy, when they're contained, when they're cared, when they're backed up, to do an amazingly good job. The general state of mind in the organization and how you treat each person has a tremendous impact, as in sports, but in your workplace. Let me show what Jack Welch has to say in general, summarizing pillars of leadership development. What would those be that we mentioned above?
One would be knowing that when you're a leader, it's not about you, it's about them, your people. Always caring about how they are developing, how they are growing, how they are building, how they are encouraged to come up with ideas. That's clearly one, but there's more than two even. Another one is you've got to be encouraging idea flow. You've got to get your team on board with a philosophy that says there's a better way every day. How do I find it? Let's talk about that better way. Let's look outside. Let's look at other companies. Let's look everywhere. There is a better way every day. And then there's this idea to engage people. Engagement is critical. Get them with a sense of purpose as to what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what's in it for them. Not what's in it for you, not what's in it for the company, what's in it for them? Is it job security? Is it promotions? Is it personal growth? What is it? But communicate that to them.
So he starts and finishes with what's in it for them. And that is another way of genuinely caring about people. So what are the key culture levers that you have? First, with the first dimension, to establish a dream. Second, in terms of people and caring for people, you need to define the values, how you see and will treat people. Those are very important in organizations. Third, in terms of communication and connectedness, you need to develop trust. And finally, in decision-making and empowering people, there's another very important concept that is what I call strategic behavior. You have values that relate to people and values when they relate to a business are called strategic behaviors. Finally, let me tell you a little bit about the bad news. And do you have to be a perfect person, the perfect David, to do all of the above? Which are the skills and attributes of a good leader? And we can't run into them, but let me share what A.G. Lafley says about it. What had a bigger impact on the difference you made at P&G? Your MBA or your history and Renaissance background?
Frankly, as CEO, my liberal arts education and my broad educational background, including, the historical studies and everything from ancient history through the Renaissance, Russian history, Asian history. MBA tools are practical. They serve you well when you're starting out. They help you learn the basics of business. And frankly, some of the key conceptual ways to think about an industry or a business. But you draw on your humanistic skills when you're leading people. And we had 135,000 people to lead inside P&G and hundreds of thousands that were part of the P&G network.
Isn't that amazing that it was more useful as a CEO, his history and Renaissance background, than his MBA? And he talks, MBA is practical. He talks a little bit about this framework. But, when you lead people, it's about the humanistic approach and the human skills. Because we've talked about emotions, about empathy, about caring. I would say that the future of leadership is feminine. I don't say that it's all about women, but I would say that you have to wake up a lot of the feminine aspects in you, both men and women. Finally, a few implications. I hope you understand by now that the culture is like the heart of your brand, that whatever brand attributes you promise, your culture has to work and deliver for. That as an entrepreneur, you have half or 80% of the job done because you will create companies with your dreams, with your values, with your sets of behaviors. And that's why I think startups have such an advantage over ordinary companies, because they do have culture that mirror the personality of the founders, of the entrepreneurs. Second, that the bad news is that it will take you a lot of time. It's a journey. You can't fake it. You can't fake caring for people. You have to look inside and start waking up that generosity gene. I met last week a woman after the conference. She said, "My boss always asks me how I am, but never waits for the answer." Finally, let me finish with an example. It's 1 minute, and then we'll go with maybe 1 or 2 questions. It's a leader that's been a lot of talking recently, and it's not Putin. Again, I chose it a little bit random. By the way, it's Argentine. But it's an amazing story. And let's see how we use our framework to understand the story of Pope Francis. On the first dimension, establishing a vision, popes are very lucky because before they even go to the balcony, they have to choose the name. And the name represents their vision for their papacy. And he chose Francis. So without pronouncing his first word, he had already laid such a powerful vision. Second dimension, deeply caring for people. Do you have any doubts that he deeply cares for people? Third dimension, communication. He walks the talk. With his examples, he sets such a powerful messages. And again, here you will see, you can't fake it. He's been preparing himself for 76 years to do what he is doing. He is being himself. It's a lifelong journey. And finally, maybe less well known, but he is empowering and decentralizing the church very determinately. So, these are the emotions and state of minds you have to wake up. These are the questions that you can put yourself in your agenda, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, each day of the week. And I can assure you that you ask these questions, just by asking in 6 months, you'll improve significantly your leadership. And finally, pin this framework to your desk and work not only on strategy, but on culture as well. I thank you all again very much. I deeply care and passionately care about a brighter future, because it will bring, I'm sure, the next 5-10 years, a lot more of human organizations, of organizations that are as human as the people working in there. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay.
Eduardo, this is not working, but...
I'm glad for you.
Thank you very much. We have 3 questions from the public. The first one, and the most voted one. Remember, you can make your questions at phlive.at. The first one is, empowering the team means being able to surrender control, which is not the nature of leaders. How would you recommend people to learn to do that?
Which is not the nature of leaders. Well, if you are mixing up having authority and power to give orders, that is not leadership. Leadership is to have such a powerful dream, such a caring for people, that you walk and they walk behind you. So you have to give up control. Particularly, and more in business. Maybe 100 years ago, 90% of the people were illiterate. You had to give a lot of orders. Well, those times are definitely over, and you need to flip everything around, and you need to empower your people. I have so many stories of Southwest that they do that.
Okay, thank you. Second question. Some of us are about to rejoin the workforce. Understanding the culture of the company can be difficult, especially when you are desperate to get a job. What can you do to see if we fit in the culture?
Well, I say the key to success is firing your superstar. That sounds a little bit awkward. The key to success is firing your superstar. Well, if the superstar doesn't fit the culture, doesn't play by the culture, you fire him. And Jack Welch does that, and Tony Hsieh does that. Alternatively, you have to hire for culture. So hire and fire for culture. You yourself, you have to choose the organization that have people you like to hang around with. It's tough. And if you're in your own workplace and company, you can change the world around you. Changing yourself, the way you walk into the office every morning and the way you treat your employees, you'll change the world around you, even if you work for government. Look.
Final question, Eduardo. With 7 billion people on the planet, how does one form the best, most efficient team with shared similar goals to work towards a common outcome?
Wow. Well, let's leave that to the next speaker.
Come on.
Soul searching. And one of the implications I didn't mention is that the culture of an organization, I'm using culture for organizational culture, is embedded in the culture of society. And you need to recognize the values that appear in society to define your own culture, your own values in the organization. And the world as a whole, well, you need to first understand the issues, know what you believe, know what you stand for, and then passionately invite people to change the world. Steve Jobs says that when you understand that you can change the world, you'll never be the same, even if it's by performing AV equipment that works or an NGO.
Thank you very much, Eduardo.
Thank you.
Please give a round of applause.